Hi guys, welcome back to Christy's Book Corner. I'm your host Christy Mason, and today we're going to be reading Inkheart again by Cornelia Funk. And we're not halfway there yet, but we're getting there. We're on chapter 21. I think this is the funny part. I'm not really sure when he says it, but I know it's Basta that says it. I think. I don't know. It's really funny. You'll know because you'll hear me laugh. Okay, chapter 21. Basta. Ooh, Basta. The evil one with a knife. Maggie woke up. Sorry, I gotta get my page. Maggie woke up when Mo stopped. The path had brought them almost to the crest of the hill. It was still dark, but the night was growing paler, as if lifting her skirt as little way off to let the new morning bear appear. We must take a breather just for your... Sorry, my... Dust finger. Maggie heard Mo saying, "The boy can hardly keep up. Eleanor's feet must need a rest, and if you ask me, this wouldn't be a bad place for one." "What feet?" asked Eleanor, sinking into the ground with a groan. "You mean those four sole objects attached to my legs?" "That's what I mean," said Mo, as he pulled her up again. "But they must go just a little further. We'll rest up there, a good 50 meters to their left. At the very top of the hill there was a house, if you could call it that, huddled among the olive trees." Maggie slipped off Mo's back before they climbed up to it. The walls looked as if someone had piled up a number of stones in a hurry. The roof had collapsed, and where there must once have been a door, only a black hole now gaped. Mo had to bend low to make his way in. Broken shingles from the roof covered the floor. There was only empty sack in the corner, some broken earthenware shards, perhaps from a dish or a plate, and a few bones gnawed clean. Mo sighed. "Not a very comfortable place, Maggie," he said. "But try imagine you're hiding out with the Lost Boys, or in Huckleberry Finn's tub." Maggie looked around. "I think I'd rather sleep outside all the same." Eleanor came in. The combination didn't seem to appeal much to her either. Mo gave Maggie a kiss and went back to the door. "Believe me, it'll be safer in here," he said. Maggie looked at him in concern. "Where are you going? You have to get some sleep too." "Oh, I'm not tired." His face gave away his lie. "Go to sleep now, all right?" Then he went out again. Eleanor pushed the broken shingles aside with her foot. "Come on," she said, taking off her jacket and spreading it on the floor. "Let's try to make ourselves comfortable together. Your father's right. We must just imagine we're somewhere else. Why are adventures so much more fun when you read about them?" she murmured, stretching out on the floor. Cautiously, Maggie lay down beside her. "At least, it isn't raining," remarked Eleanor, looking at the collapsed roof. "And we have the stars above us, even if they're fading. Perhaps I ought to have a few holes knocked in my own roof at home." With an impatient nod, she told Maggie to lay her head on her arm. "In case any spiders try to crawl into your ears while you're asleep," she said, closing her eyes. "Oh, Lord," Maggie heard her add in a murmur, "I have to buy a new pair of feet. I really will. There's no hope for these. With that she was asleep, but Maggie lay with her eyes wide open, listening to the sounds outside. She heard Mo talking quietly to Dustfinger, but she couldn't make out the words. When she thought she heard Basta's name, the boy Farid had stayed outside too, but he made no sound. Eleanor began snoring out only a few minutes, but hard of Maggie's tried to she couldn't get to sleep, so she got up and quietly slipped outside. Mo was awake, sitting with his back against a tree, watching the morning light drive the night from the sky above the surrounding hills. Dustfinger was sitting a little farther off. He raised his head only briefly when Maggie came out of the hut. Was he thinking of the fairies and the goblins? Farid lay beside him, curled up like a dog, and Gwyn was sitting at his feet eating something. Maggie quickly turned her head away. Dawn was breaking over the hills, casting light on summit after summit. Maggie saw houses in the distance, scattered like the toys on the garden green slopes. Like the sea must lie somewhere beyond them. She put her head on Mo's lap and looked up at his face. They wouldn't find us there. Will they? She asked. No, of course not, he said. But his face wasn't half as carefree as his voice. Why aren't you sleeping there with Eleanor? She snores, murmured Maggie. Mo smiled, then frowning, he looked down the hillside too. The place where the path lay, hidden by rock rows, brambles and thorns. Dustfinger never took his eyes off the path either. The sight of the two men on watch made Maggie feel better, and soon she was sleeping as deeply as Farid, as if the ground outside the tumble-down house were covered with downy feathers instead of thorns. When Mo shook her awake, at first she thought it had been just a bad dream, but his hand was over her mouth and was holding her finger to his lips in warning. Maggie heard the rustling of grass and the barking of dog. Mo pulled her to her feet and pushed her and Farid into the shelter of the dark hovel. Eleanor was still snoring. She looked like a little young girl with the light of dawn on her face. But as soon as Mo had woken her, all her weariness, anxiety, and fear came rushing back. Mo and Dustfinger stationed themselves by the doorway, one to the left and the other to the right, their backs pressed to the wall. Men's voices broke the quiet of the morning. Maggie thought she could hear the dog sniffing and wishing she could dissolve into the thin air, odorless and invisible air. Farid stood beside her, his eyes wide. Maggie noticed for the first time that they were almost black. She had never seen such dark eyes, and his lashes were as long as the girl's. Eleanor was leaning against the wall opposite, biting her lips nervously. Dustfinger made a sign to Mo, and before Maggie realized what their plan was, they made their way out. The olive trees where they took cover were stunned with matted branches hanging almost to the ground, as if the weight of their leaves was too much for them. A child could easily have hidden behind them, but did they provide enough shelter for two grown men? Maggie peered. Maggie peered out of the doorway. Her heart was beating so fast that it almost suffocated her. Outside, the sun was rising higher and higher. Daylight crept into every valley beneath every tree, and suddenly Maggie wished for the night again. Mo was kneeling down so his head couldn't be seen above the tangled branches. Dustfinger was pressing hard against a crooked tree trunk, and there, terrifying close 20 paces, most away from the two of them, was Basta. He was making his way up the slope through thistles and knee-high grass. They'll have reached the valley by now, Maggie heard a rough voice call, and next moment Flatnose appeared beside Basta. They had brought 2 vicious-looking dogs with them. Maggie saw the dogs' broad skulls pushing through the grass and heard them sniffling. What with 2 children and that fat woman? Basta shook his head and looked around. Furry peered past Maggie and flinched back as if something had bitten him when he saw the 2 men. Basta, soundlessly. Eleanor's lips formed his name. Maggie nodded, and Eleanor went even paler than she was already. Damn it, Basta, how much longer are you going to trudge around here? Flatnose's voice echoed a long way in the silence that they lay over the hills. The snakes will soon be waking up, and I'm hungry. Let's just say they fell into the valley with the car. Well, give another push and no one will find out. The snakes will probably get them anyway, and if not, then they'll lose their way, starve, get sunstroke, or who cares what happens. But anyway, we'll never see them again. He's been feeding them the cheese. Basta furiously hauled the dogs to the side. That bloody little fire-eater has been feeding them cheese in the room for the nose. Okay, good. But nobody would believe me. No wonder they whine. It's whine. But nobody would believe me. No wonder they whine with joy every time they see his ugly mug. You beat them too much, grunted Flatnose. That's why they won't work for you. Dogs don't like being beaten. Nonsense. You have to beat them or they'll bite you. They like the fire-eater because he's like them. He whines, he's sly, and he bites. One of the dogs lay down in the grass and licked his paws. Angrily, Basta kicked it into the ribs and held it to his feet. You can go back to the village if you like, he spat at the Flatnose, but I'm going to get that fire-eater and cut off all his fingers one by one. Then we'll see how clever he can juggle. I always said he couldn't be trusted, but the boss thought this little trick with fire was so entertaining. Okay, everyone knows you can't stand him. Flatnose sounded bored, but he may have nothing to do with this disappearance of that bunch. You know, he's always come and gone as he pleased. Maybe he'll turn up again tomorrow, knowing nothing about it. Yeah, right, growled Basta. He walked on. Every step brought him closer to the trees behind which Mo and Dustfinger were hiding. And Silvertongue stole the fat woman's car key from under my pillow, did he? No, this time no excuses will do Dustfinger any good, because he took something else too, something of mine. And involuntarily, Dustfinger put his hand to his belt, as if he were afraid that Basta's knife could call out into his master. One of the dogs raised its head and tugged Basta on toward the trees. He's found something. Basta, however, lowered his voice. The stupid creatures picked up a scent. The stupid creatures picked up a scent. 10 more paces, perhaps fewer, and he would be among the trees. What were they going to do? What on earth were they going to do? Flatnose was trudged along after Basta, with a skeptical expression on his face. They probably scented a wild boar. Maggie heard him say, "You want to be careful. They can run you right now. They can run you right now. Down. Oh no, I think there's a snake there. One of those black snakes. You got to antidote in the car, right?" Down the ground in front of his feet, Basta took it to notice of him. He followed the snuffling dog. A few more steps, and Mo would only have to reach out a hand to touch him. Basta unslung the shotgun from his shoulder, stopped and unlatched the dogs and listened. The dog pulled to the left and jumped up at one of the tree trunks, barking. Gwen was up there in the branches. "What did I say?" called Flatnose. "They've scented a marten, that's all. Those brutes stink so strong even I could pick up their smell." "That's no ordinary marten," hissed Basta. "Don't you recognize him?" His eyes were fixed on the ruined hovel. Mo seized his opportunity. He sprang out from behind the trees, seized Basta, and tried to wrench the gun from his hands. Get him, you brutes!" bellowed Basta, and obviously the dogs were willing to obey him this time. They leaped up at Mo, baring their yellow teeth. Before Maggie could run to his aid, Eleanor seized her and held her tight no matter how hard she struggled, just as she had done before back in her own house. But this time there was someone else to help Mo before the dogs could sink their teeth into him. Dustfinger had grabbed their collars. Maggie thought they could tear him apart. When he dragged them off, Mo put instead they licked his hands, jumping up and at him like an old friend, and almost knocking him down. But there was still Flatnose. Luckily he wasn't too quick on the uptake. That saved them. For a brief moment he simply stood there staring at Basta, who was still struggling into Mo's grip. Meanwhile, Dustfinger had hauled the dogs over to the nearest tree and was just winding their leashes around the cracked bark from Flatnose. Came out of the daze. "Let him go," he bellowed, pointing his shotgun at Mo. With a suppressing curse, Dustfinger let the dogs loose, but the stone furrowed through moved faster than he did. It hit Flatnose in the middle of the forehead, an insignificant little stone, but the huge man collapsed into the grass at Dustfinger's feet like a felled tree. "Keep the dogs off me," called Mo, as Basta fought to get control of his gun. One of the dogs had bitten Mo's sleeve. At least, Maggie hoped it was just his sleeve. Before Eleanor could restrain her again, she ran to the big dog and seized its stud collar. The dog wouldn't let go. However hard she pulled, she saw blood on Mo's arm, and she almost got hit on the head with the barrel of Basta's shotgun. Dustfingers tried to call off the dogs, and at first they obeyed him, or at least they let go of Mo, but then Basta successfully freed himself. "Get him!" he shouted, and the dogs stood there growling, not sure whether to obey Basta or Dustfinger. "Bloody brutes!" shouted Basta, pointing his shotgun at Mo's chest, but at that very moment Eleanor pressed the muzzle of Flatnose's gun against his head. Her hands were shaking. I have to. I'm talking too fast. And her face was covered with red blotches, as it always was when she was worked up. But she looked more than determined to use the gun. "Drop the gun, Basta," she said, her voice unsteadily, "and not only another word to those dogs. I may not have used a gun before, but I'm sure I can manage to pull the trigger." "Sit, Dustfinger," ordered the dogs. They looked uncertain at Basta, but when he said nothing they lay down in the grass and let Dustfinger tie them up to the tree. Blood was trickling from Mo's sleeve. Maggie felt herself turn faint at the sight of it. Dustfinger bound up the wound with a red silk scarf that soaked up the blood. "It's not as bad as it looks," he assured Maggie, as she came closer, feeling weak at the knees. "Got anything else in your backpack that we can use to help him?" asked Mo, nodding at the still unconscious Flatnose. "Our friend with a knife will never some packaging too," said Eleanor. Basta glares at it. Hasn't come up yet. His knife viciously. "Don't stare at me like that," she said, jamming the barrel of the gun into his chest. "I'm sure a gun like this can do as much damage as a knife, and believe you me, that gives me some very unpleasant ideas." Basta twisted his mouth scornfully, but he never took his eyes off Eleanor's finger, which was still on the trigger. There was a length of cord in Dustfinger's backpack, strong if not particularly thick. It won't be enough for both of them," Dustfinger said. "Why don't you want to tie them up?" "Enough, Farid. Why not kill them? That's what they were going to do to us." Maggie looked at him in horror, but Basta laughed. "Well, fancy that," he mocked. "We could have used that boy after all." "But who says we were going to kill you?" Capricorn wants. "I'm alive. Dead men can't read aloud. Dead men tell no tales." Oh, really? And weren't you planning to cut off some of my fingers?" asked Dustfinger, tying the cord around Flatnose's leg. Basta shrugged. "Since when does a man die of that?" Eleanor jabbed the barrel of the gun into his ribs so hard that he stumbled back. "Hear that? I think the boy's right. Maybe we really ought to shoot these thugs." But of course they did. They found a rope in the backpack that Flatnose had brought with him, and it gave Dustfinger obviously pleasure to tie up Basta. Farid helped him. He clearly knew something about tying a prisoner. Then they put Basta and Flatnose in the ruined house. "Nice of us, right? The snake wouldn't find you quite so soon," said Dustfinger, as they carried Basta through the snake's narrow doorway. "Of course it'll get pretty hot in here around midday, but maybe someone will have found you by then. We'll let the dogs go. If they have any sense that they won't return to the village, but the dogs don't often have much sense, so the whole gang will probably be out searching for you by this afternoon at the latest." Flatnose did not come around until he was lying beside Basta under the ruined roof. He rolled his eyes furiously and went purple in the face, but neither he nor Basta could utter a sound because Farid had gagged them both, again very expertly. "Wait a minute," said Dustfinger, before they left the two men to their fate. "There's something else, something I've always wanted to do." And to Maggie's horror, he drew Basta's knife from his belt and went over to the prisoners with it. "What's the idea?" asked Mo, hurrying his way. Obviously, the same thought had occurred to him as it had to Maggie, but Dustfinger only laughed. "Don't worry, I'm not going to cut a pattern in his face, the way he decorated mine," he said. "I only want to scare him a little." And he had already bent down to cut through the leather thong that Basta wore around his neck. It had a little bag closed with a red drawstring hanging from it. Dustfinger leaned over Best and swung the bag back and forth in front of his face. "I'm taking your luck, Bazda," he said, softly straightening up. "Now there's nothing to protect you from the evil eye and the ghosts and demons, black cats, and all the other things you're afraid of." Basta tried to kick out with his bound legs, but Dustfinger avoided him easily. "This is good-bye forever, I hope, Bazda," he said, "and if your paths should ever cross again, then I'll have this." He tied the leather thong around his own neck. "I expect there's a lock of your hair in it, right?" "No." "Well, then perhaps I'll take one." "No, this doesn't burn someone's hair like a terrible effect on him." That's enough," said Mo, urging him away. "Let's get out of here. Who knows when Capricorn will realize these two are missing? By the way, did I tell you that he didn't burn quite all the books? There's one copy of Inkheart left." Dustfinger stopped as suddenly as if a snake had bitten him. "I thought I ought to tell you," said Mo, "even if it doesn't put stupid ideas into your head." Dustfinger just nodded. Then, without a word, he walked on. "Why don't we take their van?" suggested Eleanor when Mo headed back into the path. "They must have left it on the road." "Too dangerous," said Dustfinger. "How do we know who might be waiting for us down there? And going back to it would take us longer than going up to the nearest village. A van like that is easily spotted, too. Do you want to set Capricorn on our trail?" Eleanor sighed. "It was just a thought," she murmured, massaging her aching ankles. Then she followed Mo. They kept to the path because the snakes were already moving through the tall grass. Once a thin black serpent wiggled over the yellow solid in front of them. Dustfinger pushed a stick over its scaly body and threw it back into the thorn bushes. Maggie had expected the snakes to be bigger, but Eleanor assured her that the smallest were the most dangerous. Eleanor that's probably true, was limping, but she did her best not to hold up the others. Mo, too, was walking more slowly than usual. He tried to hide it, but the dog bite obviously hurt. Maggie walked close to him and kept looking anxiously at the red scarf. Dustfinger had used to bandage the wound. At last they came to a paved road. A truck with a load of rusty gas cylinders was coming toward them. They were too tired to hide, and anyway, it was coming from the direction of Capricorn's village. Maggie saw the surprised expression on the man on the wheel as he passed them. They must have looked very disreputable in their dirty clothes, drenched with sweat and torn by all the thorn bushes. Soon afterward they passed the first house. There were more and more of them on the slopes now, brightly colored, washed with flowers, growing outside their doors. Trudging on, and they came to the outskirts of the fairly large town. Maggie saw multi-story buildings, palm trees with dusty leaves, and suddenly, still far away from shining silver in the sun, a glimpse of the sea. "Heavens! I hope they'll let us into a bank," said Eleanor. "We look as if we've fallen among thieves." "Well, so we have," said Mo. That's the end of chapter 21. Next chapter is chapter 22. Keep watching my videos. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like. And click the notifications bell to be notified when I upload another video. And remember to dare to dream.